Hello and welcome to Ready Start Podcast. I'm your host, Carter Fernandez. I'm a university student studying a Bachelor of Serious Game Design at the University of Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia. The question of today, what is your favourite console? Mine would have to be the PlayStation 2. I've put 1,000,000 hours into it, playing all my favourite games growing up as a child. And today's special guest?
Hey guys, I'm Braiden. I work at Euclidean Holographic as a 3D artist. On the side, I work for the company Big Oof Games, which is an indie studio working on Trench's Work in Progress, which is a combination of bombastic combined arms FPS action and strategic base building on a grand, multiplayer, and completely destroyable scale. And my favorite console is probably the PS4, since I can't choose the PC. Mostly because that is the console that has Bloodborne on it, which completely redefined my taste in video games.
What a great game that is. All right, thank you for that. And this is the podcast. So, Braiden, you work at Euclidean.
Yep.
Whilst working also on Trenches on the side. So I have to ask, is it difficult to manage the indie project and a full-time job?
So, yes and no. One of the advantages to working full-time at Euclidean is that we have set hours. So I know that I will always be, at work 9 to 5, that, I'll always be free on weekends, stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to kind of know what times that I can work on the project, on Trenches, that is. But what is difficult is trying to manage free time for myself versus working on Trenches.
That's definitely important because you're the 3D artist at both your job and on Trenches, and burnout is a real thing, even if it's something you're extremely passionate about.
Oh, yes. The biggest thing is, just managing burnout and just finding time to not work on anything. It's really understated how important it is to have time to just kind of kick back and not work on anything. That will constitute more to burnout than anything else. So finding time to balance personal life and working on your own projects, as well as, most of your time being taken up by a full-time job. That's kind of where the balancing act comes in. The advantage being knowing when I'm free.
With Trenches, it's been on Steam just over a year now. It was August 2019 it was first put up.
Yep.
Version 0.01 or Steam. And the majority of reviews were positive. They seem to think that you're going in the right direction, but some are unsatisfied with the progression of development. Do you think that there's a stigma with early access games in regards to the speed of development? And do you think that if there is it warranted?
I absolutely think there's a stigma. One of the biggest things that we've come to discover is that the community, when they see an early access title, they expect it to be finished. They actually sit down to play it, which can be quite stressful. And I think a lot of this comes from AAA studios kind of jumping on the early access wagon and kind of co-opting it for themselves as like early beta testing for their games, which have had huge, studios to give them the polish. Yeah, an indie project that's going on early access very likely is going to be insanely feature incomplete. But the weird thing is that it seems like if any element of the playable game is incomplete, people just hate it immediately. There's definitely a bit of community and expectation management required in putting a game up on early access, and it's mostly because, ironically, people expect early access games to be complete by the time they sit down and play them. So I don't consider it particularly warranted, but it is just a reality of the industry and the way that expectations have been handled in the past by other studios.
Yeah. But the feedback on Steam itself has been positive, but that can only get you so far because people will leave reviews saying it's fun. But the Trenches Work in Progress actually has a Discord server, which the link is on screen now. You can go and join for yourself. where people can give more in-depth feedback. Do you personally think that the feedback there has been positive? Or do you think it's been constructive, or have people gone to just complain?
We find that on the Discord it is mostly positive. We do get a lot of very constructive feedback or constructive criticism, but we find that usually if somebody's had a bad job to the point where they're like mad about the game, they won't usually come to a Discord to tell you about it. They'll usually just leave a bad review and then move on.
You'd hope.
Whereas you'd hope, yeah, we've had one or two people jump onto the Discord and be like, oh, yeah, this game's awful, this game, without really giving us any feedback, and that's fine. That's an expected part of creating a public product.
Yeah.
Yeah, those ones we don't find as important or as useful as the people that come into the Discord and will actually engage with us and discuss. And we find that like most of our community will kind of jump into the Discord and they'll just stay quiet. They won't say a thing because they're kind of waiting for the game to be finished, but they want to kind of be in, get their foot in the door before it's out. Whereas we have this very small group of people that are very vocal, and they're the ones that will tell you most of how they feel the game should move and how it should progress from here. And their feedback can be quite useful. We've actually incorporated a fair few of their ideas into the final product, but it's always kind of a balancing act between listening to community feedback and using your own intuition to kind of know what should be added in. Yeah.
It's your game.
Exactly, and there's the unfortunate thing with managing a community is that a lot of the time when a feature is suggested, it's a feature that was thought up where they haven't really seen the forest through the trees. They a lot of we've kind of come to coin them when we talk about them as it would be cool ideas, where they usually begin with, hey, it would be cool if.
I've had a few of those.
Yeah. And they're the tough ones that kind of require a fair bit of discussion before we figure out if it's something we want to go with. Because a lot of the time, what will be cool won't make the game good.
Mm-hmm.
We get a lot of people who will come in and say stuff like, it would be really cool if the game had simulated weight mechanics and a fatigue system, and your weapons would get rusty if you move around in mud for too long, and that would cause them to occasionally jam. And they're all cool ideas. And would be excellent in some games, but are they going to fit in with the rest of the game? Because mechanical consistency is important.
And not only that, but I think a big thing with games like yours is it fun?
Exactly.
Is it a fun... if I'm playing a game and the mechanics are more tedious than fun, I'm not likely to go back.
Exactly. And, this... looking back at the history of our design, you can even see us learning from our own mistakes we found. At first, when Trenches first came out, it had a big inventory system, and there was...
I remember the screenshots, some early trailers.
Yeah, there was like a big inventory system with a grid base, and the players, each building had an inventory itself, and you could move things into the building's inventories, and you could craft, like, to make a tank, you'd have to go to one building and craft like cogs and an engine and wheels and all this stuff, and then take it to the tank factory and produce the tank. And what we found is sounds all really cool when you're discussing it as like a GDD idea, but in reality what it meant is a player would jump in, they would go, how do I make a tank? They would look, maybe build a tank factory, they'd check, oh, it requires cogs and stuff. How do I make the cogs? There's no information on how to make that. If they do find it, it's like, oh, now I need to go get this resource and that resource and put them together. And I just want to shoot someone. And then they would just run out with their pistol and start shooting people.
It's an FPS. It's
exactly. And we've kind of found that like the FPS has kind of risen above the other mechanics in the game, because at the core of the game, it's an FPS. You're having to kind of deal with... sometimes you kind of have to make a compromise in your design from what you originally wanted, just because sometimes what's cool isn't fun.
And that's not just an indie thing either. I think that's right there is games in a whole.
Exactly.
The cutting room floor is the messiest place in the game industry.
Oh yeah, and I think what's been tough with trenches is that we've kind of made the cutting room floor open for everyone to view, which a lot of indie games won't do. Most indie games won't put their game up on early access until mostly done, or at least like alpha. We would say at the moment, like trenches is like 10% complete. It's pre alpha.
It's a fun 10% though.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of what we're loving, is that like it's been fun to kind of experiment with the game because we're still in that early part of like development. We still have the ability to kind of get into the guts of it and change things around. Unfortunately, it's very hard to manage consumer expectation, which, to kind of bring it back around to that initial question, a lot of people, when they come in and they check out the game for the first time, they will leave a negative review because they check it out and it's just really early in development,
Yeah.
and they're going in expecting a finished product.
But with the audience on Steam, how would you describe finding the audience, or did the audience find you?
They mostly found us. I do a fair bit of the social media, or all the social media for trenches.
Which are all on screen now, and I can 100% recommend going and checking out because it's amazing.
Yeah, I try to put some more interesting stuff in. Occasionally we don't have a lot of actual content to show people, but sometimes we get to have some fun with it. But yeah, I'll send a lot of social media posts out into the wild, and they will attract more users to the game. But the vast majority we've found of people that come to join our game now, they hear it through word of mouth, which I didn't expect. We'll get someone who will go, "Hey, my friend mentioned this game, and I thought I would come check it out." And then they play it, and then they'll give us our feedback after they've played it. So yeah, that's been an unexpected.
I mean, that's where I heard it. I found out trenches through someone I knew.
Exactly. But yeah, when we first initially kind of jumped into working on it, we didn't expect it to be something that was mostly heard through word of mouth. We kind of expected it to be more of an algorithm thing, which at first it was. You get boosted really far up in everyone's like store page
On Steam.
searches. Yeah, on Steam when you first put the game out. But then, after a couple of weeks, it kind of slides down into the background and nobody sees it again.
Lots of streamers played it, and it's super popular.
Exactly. And occasionally, we've had recently a YouTuber did some coverage of the game, and that's really helped with kind of getting people back into it. Yeah, for the most part, it's just word of mouth.
Has the game performed as you expected?
We've had certain parts of the game underperform significantly. We've had other parts where it's just completely blown us out of the water with how much people like certain things. And other parts it's about how we expected. We always expected the building system to be a huge hit because it's something that nobody's really done before in this kind of game. The ability to build trenches and deform the terrain by building them, like nobody's really done that.
Destructible environments are a big thing that are like it's almost required to have a hit on a first-person shooter these days, but you never see changeable environments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's always been a not a delightful surprise, more of a exactly how we expected it to be, which is popular. We're surprised that more people are requesting an emphasis on the FPS over the strategy side of things. What we didn't, ironically, the biggest thing we didn't expect to be asked for and has overperformed significantly is the single player. So the game comes with a wave defense game mode that we really made it in a hurry, just so that we could show off the game at a presentation we were doing, and people fell in love with it. People want to play the wave defense more than they want to play the multiplayer, which has been very interesting to kind of discover.
I have found it personally playing it with the single player, grabbing a sniper and just sitting there popping
Exactly.
heads.
And like, as one of the designers on the game, that's been really surprising because we didn't think people would enjoy that very much. As one of the developers myself, we're kind of cursed with that inability to see the game as a game. We're always going to kind of see it as the construct that we put together. Whenever there's a any little bit out of place or something where we've kind of screwed up, we're always going to notice it, and it's never going to be as good as we imagined it. So it's been really surprising hearing how much people like the Last Stand mode as opposed to everything else, which, we've definitely spent more time working on everything else, but due to the amount of positive feedback, we've decided we kind of have to knuckle down on adding more single player content, or at the very least we discovered that, like, okay, we need to add bots to the other modes because people love shooting them. They're dumb as a sack of potatoes at the moment, but people still love just having them in a game because they tear stuff up, they make players engage more with the mechanics.
So going off the work with the indie game and the people talking about it, do you think that there's a substantial difference in the perception between indie games and AAA games? Or is there a middle ground?
I know I keep saying this, but yes and no. I think there's certain elements that people kind of see the same and elements that they see as quite different. Usually people will expect indie games to be a little lower quality than AAA and a little more experimental than AAA, but there's still this expectation of quality from indie games that comes about because I feel there's a little bit of a fundamental misunderstanding of how games are made.
It's like giving an idea. It's like saying, I want this car to be able to drive like this, and I want to do this and this. And it's like, yeah, but figuring out how to actually make that happen, I'm not going to do that overnight. There's not a guidebook on how to make this car do the exact thing you want it to do.
Exactly, and like as an indie developer, you're much more intertwined with the design of the game. While you've got more creative freedom, it also means that you don't really have anyone above you that knows how stuff should be done.
You yourself are young, and you're relatively, in the grand scheme of things, new to the professional gaming industry, and being your own boss in the Big Oof Studios. Having someone who hasn't been in the studio for 30 years telling you how things should be done, I can only imagine is stressful.
Yes. Especially because with my day job, it's so different to the stuff I'm doing in trenches that they don't really complement each other when it comes to experience. The projects that I do in my day job are usually not very design centric. They're much more built to specifications that the company requires. Whereas with trenches, everything is kind of like vague, and you're making a good video game with nice graphics, but like, what is a good video game? What is nice graphics? And you kind of have to figure that out yourself.
Well, I think that actually leads directly into the next question, which is, do you think indie games need a unique art style in order to compete in the same league as AAA games and their push for photorealism?
No, I don't think they do. A lot of the most popular indie games at the moment, at least to myself, I find have very similar art styles. Kind of like the Fortnite art style has become very popular recently.
Quote unquote low poly, smooth texture.
Yeah, like solid materials and ambient occlusion baked into the textures kind of visuals, which is completely fine. I think that as an indie studio, while having a unique art style can be a selling point, it doesn't necessarily mean your game will be a hit. It's just as valid to develop a game that is currently using a trending art style, because a lot of people, when they see, say, the Fortnite art style or the Blizzard art style, they will just immediately default to, it's a cute art style, it's nice, it's a beautiful art style, and that's fine.
Are there any games personally to you that have inspired you, or that you would consider a cut above the rest in their aesthetic styles?
Well, like I said at the beginning, I'm a huge fan of Bloodborne. My first asset pack I ever sold was actually just a homage to Bloodborne's art style. Apart from that, I've always just been a huge fan of photorealism. So pretty much anything that looks pretty, I've been a fan of. I've always been a huge fan of the Battlefield series, and how they kind of try to create games that try to make their visuals as photorealistic as possible for the times. Games like Crysis. I've always been a huge fan of pretty games. Yeah, stuff that tries to kind of do photorealism.
What's your opinion on photorealism with I guess you consider them fantasy aspects. Games like Cyberpunk, where it's definitely photorealistic, but they have very heavy fantasy-esque elements to them. But it's not the same as, say, Battlefield, where their photorealism is to make you feel like you're experiencing a war, whereas the other one is trying to make you experience robotic limbs and flying cars.
Yeah, I really love that kind of visual. I love when games will try to bring to life in the best way they possibly can, like fantasy environments or just worlds that don't exist. And I think my favorite way of having that visualized is through photorealism. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that kind of visual because it's one thing to see. Take like the visuals of say StarCraft that are very representative of that game setting without actually showing the game in any kind of photorealism, a very artistic kind of way of representing these things. Whereas I really loved the cutscenes that they did in StarCraft 2, which were trying to go more for photorealism. And I loved seeing the little RTS characters represented as these huge, lumbering mech soldiers and stuff like that. And yeah, I love seeing fantasy or just fictional environments just brought to life.
Okay, going back to before, you made an art pack, which I guess is an awesome way of... It's an art portfolio in a sense. But when establishing an art portfolio, for us art students at university still, what do you think is more important? The variety of content in showing your range, so vehicles, small props, characters, or would it be a handful of really high quality models?
Once again, it's a bit of both. Somebody is going to a potential employer will probably be looking for a specific kind of art style when they go to hire a new person. So having a variety of different art styles on your portfolio or just a lot of one kind of art style can show your range of abilities to create different worlds or different artistic styles. Whereas, of course, most studios are going to be looking for quality. So it's also important to have some nice high quality assets. They don't need to be a turnaround or anything. They can be just a large environment that looks good. That's how I built my portfolio, is mostly environment art. More recently, I've been moving into individual assets and stuff.
Would you consider it important for someone making their portfolio, for an artist, to perhaps pick a theme or a style that they personally enjoy the most and doubling down on that? Let's say, for example, there's always going to be people making space games, and if I really like it, should I be doubling down on phaser beams and alien eggs?
If that's something you're good at, you should definitely fill your portfolio with as much of that as you can. Don't negate other elements to just double down on that asset or that style. Like it can be quite good as an employer to see that not only have you done this asset once, but you've stuck to it and you've made a range of different assets in that style with that setting. That's going to make you a lot more attractive to an employer that's looking for that specific thing.
Mm-hmm. It's like if you make a really nice gun, perhaps make a few more and show that you're really good at making guns, but also, make a spaceship and show that you can do sci-fi.
Absolutely, because there is the trap of kind of falling into looking like you've just followed a tutorial. If it's
Mm.
just like one asset just built in a void with no, supporting assets that you've made or anything else.
Yeah, you make a gun, make some clips for it, make some ammo.
Yeah,
Do you have a preferred style for your assets, and do you feel like you have a good opportunity to show that off in trenches?
yeah. So the advantage to kind of working on an indie project is it allows you to define the art style. And I myself, I like to go for photorealism within my own level of skill. But my advantage has always been that I can kind of see an asset or see a photo of something, and I'm able to recreate it relatively well in 3D, which has really helped me because we're working off two wars that both happened, so there's plenty of photos. Yeah,
Lots of reference art.
absolutely.
What advice would you give to people wanting to get into the industry, both for people perhaps starting a degree at university and for those who have graduated a degree and have the skill sets but are unsure on the next steps?
Well, if you're still at university, my biggest recommendation would be get to know everybody in your class and once you've got to know them, make sure that you've shown them every piece of work you've ever worked on, and make sure that everyone knows exactly how good you are at your chosen field. Because one of the most important things I learned during my time working in the industry is that the saying "it's not what you know, it's who you know" isn't quite true. It's who knows what you know. It's important for a potential employer to not only know that you're going to work in a team and that, well, you exist. It's just as important for them to know, how good are you at this job? Yeah, are you going to do this job well? Yeah, and if you don't have anything to back up the fact that somebody knows you, you're not going to get the job. So yeah, my biggest recommendation would be get your work as public as possible, no matter how anxious you are about people, no matter whether you're worried about people judging it or anything. The first bits of work that I put out in public are just terrible, awful pieces of work. But what's great is I can replace them over time. But I already had a big chunky portfolio when I began, and that initial portfolio is what kind of helped me get to where I am now.
How important do you think it is to be replacing assets in your portfolio, and how important do you think it is to show your progression of skill?
So I think it comes down to kind of your preference on how you want to present yourself to other people. For me, I started replacing older work when I ended up making too much work. Yeah, I was very busy during uni working on, little side projects, and I would get into the tendency of like, I'd see a photo and I'd be like, I want to remake that in 3D. And they look terrible looking back at them now, but they kind of gave me that initial portfolio. And then from there, I started to kind of slot out my old work with my new work as I got more into my job and as I learned new skills. Most of the work on my portfolio now has only been there for the last maybe 2 years. I think maybe I have one or two things that are still from back when I was at uni, but yeah, most of them are very recent work.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the question before, so it's definitely important for networking while you're still at university, but for those who have graduated, they just don't know what's the next step. What advice would you give them?
So there are a lot of different online groups for different just work communities, particularly on, say, like Facebook, on Reddit. There's a lot of groups that are devoted to kind of showing off your work to other game developers. There's a lot of meetups. I know particularly like Brisbane, where I am, there's groups devoted to having developers meet up and talk about their projects. And if you're not working on a project, they're a great place to kind of find people to work with and just meet somebody and start working on a project, because it gets you that initial foot in the door, not only as a portfolio piece but as a potential way to make some money, which can become a job.
And I guess that's where you come in with your indie company.
Absolutely.
Did that just start with you and some friends saying, let's make a game, and now it's a game, it's on Steam, people can play it?
Yeah, exactly. It began with me and two of my workmates drinking coffee in a parking lot, and we just said, hey. One of us just said, "Hey, I have this little like multiplayer FPS demo here. Do you want to make it a game?" And we were like, "Yeah, let's do that." And we made a game.
And that's all she wrote.
Yeah.
Now 2020 has been a hectic year.
Ooh,
There's been a lot for people working, people studying, just people in the world in general, due to the COVID pandemic. But I have to ask, how has it affected your workflow as an artist, the shift from working in an office to working from home?
So, for me personally, I've loved it. I found that because of all my experience, working on personal project, I was very used to kind of seeing my home computer and, my home as an office. So kind of cutting out that commute time and just working as normal was really, really good for me. I found that my productivity just shot through the roof. But of course, that doesn't really apply to everyone though, because I know quite a few of my other workmates had not as much of a great time once they started working remote. Yeah, so I think it's a person by person basis, how they kind of handled working remotely.
Because I know a big thing people say is once your gaming computer turns into your work computer, it's very difficult to relax, to be able to de-stress, because you usually separate work and home. When you leave the office, you can go home and you can boot up Steam, you can put your feet up on your desk and you can relax, but having to transfer your personal private space into a working space has taken away the relaxation zone for some people. But do you not feel like that?
I personally don't feel like that, but a big reason for that is that for the same reason as what I was talking about in one of the first questions, which is that it's really important to kind of be able to separate work time from personal time, and managing which time is which.
Mm-hmm.
Because if work is always on the brain, it doesn't matter where you are, you're just going to be stressing about working on things. So I find that it's important to kind of see your computer while working remotely as still your computer that you also do work on.
Mm-hmm.
And not the place you do work but take time off to not do work.
I know personally, doing uni from home, I get that itchy trigger finger where Steam is right there. I got my assignment up, and then 2 seconds later, I could have a game up.
Yeah, and the way that our company kind of dealt with that was we actually took our work computers home with us. So whenever I was working, I had to use my work computer, and I just kind of hooked that one up to my center screen. So it wasn't quite as easy to transition from work to play.
Yeah, I personally, because I had my Switch on my desk beforehand, I've had to move that across the room so it isn't just an arm's reach. And if I'm standing up to reach it, I have that split second of realization where it's like, no, I have work to do.
I had to hide my Switch behind my computer screen.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. I forget it's there when I can't see it.
That's it. And you found the shift from office to home. You found that transition smooth.
I personally did, but I was very used to like doing freelance contracts or working on, different passion projects or trenches. So I'd kind of already seen my home environment as a bit of an office.
Mm-hmm.
So, long before COVID happened, I already was having to manage, work from play. But I also understand that is very much not the same for anyone else, or for most people.
And you've said that working from home, you've just excelled at how much work you've actually gotten done. Being from home, being comfortable, not being able to wear your pajamas to the office has made it much easier to get work done. But not naming any names, but do you think there has been a noticeable slowdown in the workflow overall on the projects you've worked on?
There was while we were working remotely. Yeah, I just for a lot of people it is quite difficult to kind of transition into working at home, especially if you've seen your home as the place where, work doesn't enter.
Leave work at the door, and now you've had to let it in.
Yeah, so for a lot of the company it can be quite difficult to transition, but that unfortunately is just the nature of working remote.
And I think you've answered this already, but I'll just ask again, do you prefer working at home or the studio?
I personally prefer working at home.
So you don't find that working from home has cut down on your social interactions?
No, I'd kind of been craving a bit of time to myself outside of work. So being able to work remotely has given me a bit more time to relax.
And not saying that it isn't good working at work with people, but you're definitely there to work.
Yeah, like when I'm at work, I very much kind of enter like, work mode, which isn't to say that I don't spend time, bantering or talking to other employees. That's kind of the nature of the office environment. But yeah, ultimately, I'm there to get work done.
Yeah, you're your profession, you're there to be paid, you're there to get the job done.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you transfer your skills from your university to the workplace? And were there skills that you needed to learn outside of what you were taught from university in order to be employable?
Yes. So I found that one of the most important skills I learnt outside of university, ironically, was how to be a worker, if that makes sense. When university will teach you very much to be a creative and to develop content and to know which content is best. But in a workplace, you kind of need to, especially in an office workplace, you very much need to be in the mindset of, you're being paid to essentially be the hand of your employer. So it can be quite difficult to transition from the creative freedom of university or the creative freedom of working in an indie team to not really having a lot of creative freedom over what you're developing. That was a skill, ironically, that I learned through through working on indie projects because I got really sick of being the designer because it was a lot of responsibility, and I ended up just having to go to my teammates and say, okay, I just want to make assets. Just tell me what to make and I'll make them. And that was very much a skill that I had to learn outside of university. Outside of that, though, I found that a lot of the practical skills that I learned at university ended up coming in handy in my actual job. Stuff like note taking actually ended up being quite surprising. When you go into a meeting, it's important to be able to put down the information that you need in a way that you'll remember. Yeah, and apart from that, it's mostly just been translating practical skills to work within a company framework.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for coming into and doing this podcast with us. I always say it every time. The information that we get from people within the industry, I've spoken to you a few times now, and every time I speak to you, I learn more about how to make games and what the industry is like than I have at my many years at university now.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Yeah, at the end of the day, university can only teach you so much. There's some things that do need to kind of be learnt by people who have had that experience or by doing that yourself.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking your time and doing this. And
my pleasure.
I would say I didn't want to plug anything, but we've been talking about trenches this whole time.
I heard that this Trenches video game isn't too bad.
On Steam, the link for it is on the screen now, as well as all your Twitters. And anyone can just contact you if they have questions?
Yep, absolutely.
Yep, and the Discord is also up there, and it is a very big community at the moment, actually. It's grown huge since I've joined.
Yeah, 1,500 people, I believe.
Yeah, and it's a great place to come, play the game, find people to play the game with, check out that multiplayer mode, and give feedback for it. So thank you again.
Well, thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to this podcast and tuning in this week. And I hope you'll have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks.